let's talk about books with dark fairy tales and folklore at their hearts that need to be cut out by woodsmen. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sinead and this is my spooky corner of YouTube, where I talk about the spooky books that I have read, the spooky films that I have watched, and the spooky things I get up to day, such as dressing up as a wolf and chasing people through the streets as they try to deliver their weekly shop to their elderly relatives. Today I'm bringing you some book recommendations, either ones that I have read or that I will be reading in the future, all around fairy tales and folklore. New tales, retellings, compendiums, and collections, all perfect for people who like their fairy tales with a touch of darkness. I love a dark fairy tale, whether it is in a horror setting, which is my favourite genre, or whether it's in a more magical, fantastical setting, or whether it's based in real life, still drawing from the folklore of old. Any of that, I will lap it up. Now, I have waxed lyrical about my love of folk horror in different videos, and you can go and watch those if you want something really dark and horrible about nature trying to get you. So today, I'm bringing you the best of my recent reads, from terribly cute to terribly, terribly dark. I'm constantly finding more books in this genre, and you may have suggestions too, old and new, that I might enjoy. So remember to like this video, subscribe to my channel to get more updates, and drop a comment of book suggestions along the way. First, a little scene setting and some recommendations of books that look at the history of fairy tales and folklore, and some fairy tale collections. Why are we drawn to fairy tales? Well, usually these are the stories that we hear as children. They hold a bit of magic and nostalgia for us. Whether they involve fantastical creatures, strange worlds, fairy tales are the things traditionally we were told as children to send us to sleep. Soothing, nice, calming. When we think about the origins of some of those stories, the irony, oh the irony. The real magic of fairy tales is the way in which it's told. Most of us will have a beloved story from our childhood that we remember, and I will wager it's because someone told it to us. The way that person conveyed that story, with probably enthusiasm, with great light, with drama and theatricality, even if they weren't a dramatic person, someone will have told you a story at some point, and it will have captured your heart, your imagination, even your fear. In a world that sometimes feels like a massive dumpster fire, it is very reassuring to go back to the fairy tales that used to soothe us as children. Recently there's been a slew of retellings of fairy tales, of people trying to reclaim and revisit, revise the stories. Now, before people throw their arms up in the air and go, why are we messing with these classic tales, I would gently say there really is nothing wrong with reinterpreting the old tales, because that's what they were supposed to do. They were reinterpreted every single time they were told, and actually a lot of the time when they were printed between editions, because that's the tradition from whence they came. Oral tradition, a story that changes and embellishes and is changed for every single audience at every timeline that it wanders into or sails into. It's a strange word to describe how a story travels. I've not really done it before, but there you go. They started as tales whispered around the fire. They could be a way of telling people, you know what laziness will bring unless you work very hard for the land, of the hazards of going to certain places or trusting certain people. Fairy tales and storytelling was a way of spreading information, but obviously that information could be warped and twisted the more people who told it. Think fairy tales, you're thinking the brothers Grimm, the two brothers from Germany who compiled, didn't write, compiled legends and folklore and tales all in one compendium. They first published it in 1812. Now, they gathered these stories that were told to them word of mouth from peasants and from nobles alike. In fact, they actually gathered a lot of stories from one woman who I think lived next door to them, and because one of the brothers fancied her. They ended up getting married, but he was around there all the time going, yeah, tell me more stories. Oh my God, I love you. The stories that the brothers Grimm compiled were gathered across the centuries again. They had been passed down through different cultures across different countries. The earliest version of Cinderella dates all the way back to ancient Greece, and it's only a small part of the story. It involves the king of Egypt having the hots for a shoe that a bird threw at him. You get the much fuller story of Cinderella from China in the 9th century that does involve a young girl battling with a wicked stepmother and losing a slipper at a party and people chasing, and then true love prevails, but people do get crushed by rocks. You have Beauty and the Beast that came from France. You have 1001 Nights, all of the Middle Eastern tales. Fun fact, I believe, this is purely from memory, 1001 Tales, there was an edition that was translated in the Victorian era and you could only get it by subscription. The first edition of the Grimm fairy tales, when it was published, only a small fraction of those tales were supposed to be for kids because, as many people will know, the original stories, dark, bloody, People are chopping their feet off and ripping themselves in half, and mothers are murdering their children or setting out to kill their kids. The stepmother thing came in later. Usually it was the mother. Fathers, nowhere to be seen. That was nothing to do with the Grimm brothers' daddy issues, I'm sure. In future editions, the brothers themselves adapted the tales based on public feedback. They said they wanted them to be more child-friendly. They wanted more tales in there, and they had a lot of pressure on them to properly represent Germany and German culture at the time. This was something that would later be horribly used by the Nazi Party. They repackaged them up as propaganda to show the superiority of the Aryan race. They took the heroes and made them that way. And some of you can see where I'm going with this. The bad characters in it were very much a certain stereotype. That is an awful example of how fairy tales can be revisited and adapted for the culture of the time. But they always will be, because these stories change and no one owns them. Fairy tales today, or traditional fairy tales and old tales, can be updated. You can have more representation in the stories. You can change the structure of them a little as you go along and still keep the essence of the story pure. There are plenty of lovely, cozy, snuggly books out there about fairy tales, but I'm a horror fan, and I love any fairy tale that delves into the darkness, that takes the folklore of old and twists it into something dark and relevant for a modern audience. If I'm gonna be served a tale of a young woman whose ultimate aim in life is to run away and marry the prince and then live happily ever after, someone needs to have something cut off with an axe during that story. A wolf needs to swallow someone whole. Someone needs to be chopping off bits of their foot in order to fit into the latest fashion. Clearly I could babble on about fairy tales and the history of storytelling for a very long time, but I'm going to give a shout out right now to anyone who likes their fairy tales soothing. If you love your fairy tales without the horror, without the bone-crushing bloodiness, you want it a bit more family friendly, then I highly recommend the podcast Dragonfly Tales. This is a podcast created by my sister, so you know she's got a good background. We both grew up in the same spooky household. She has created this podcast as a professional storyteller. She is incredibly talented, she does an incredible amount of research, and she has a great understanding of so many of the classic stories, of stories you may have never heard of from different cultures, from different time periods. She puts these all together in the podcast with my nephew Leo, so it is family friendly. You can enjoy it with your little ones, or you can enjoy it on your own, because it is such a soothing, wonderful listen. The details are here on the screen and I've put them in the description. Please go and give them a like, a subscribe, a download, whatever you can, and enjoy some delightful fairy tales. Let's start off with some fairy tale compendiums and also some guides to the folklore that you may find in your stories. Of course, I recommend reading the Grimm fairy tales. Other people have taken them, they've adapted them, they've tried to retell them. I found this on my shelf. I have a copy of Philip Pullman's collection of the Grimm tales, as he says, for young and old. This is a collection of 50 of the tales, so it's not all of them, and he retells them, and he retells them very clearly and precisely without too much extra embellishment. If you're a fan of Philip Pullman, it is a great way of accessing the Grimm tales. On the subject of the Grimm fairy tales, I'll also do a shout out for the brilliant film that came out in 2025, The Ugly Stepsister. This is a film of body horror. You should not watch it if you are squeamish. However, I can say it is absolutely brilliant. It's one of the best films that I've seen this year and in a long time. It is the story of Cinderella from the perspective of the ugly stepsister and what she does to try and transform herself to be suitable for the prince. It is a brilliant retelling of that story, reversing so many of the roles, twisting on its head of who is innocent, who is being manipulated, what women will do to achieve beauty and perfection in the eyes of others. If you can stomach it, watch it. I loved it. And now I'm going to lean over here and ruin the continuity of this video, potentially, by getting some books off my shelf. If you're interested in the folklore behind your fairy tales, I heartily recommend these two. These are the Treasury of British Folklore. Now, this edition is Maypoles, Mantrakes, and Mistletoe, and this one is Waterways, Winter Worlds, Winded Worlds, Wooded Worlds, Winterlands, Waterlands, Wooded Worlds, and Starry Skies. That took a very long time for me to say. These collections will give you such great information and wonderful storytelling around the folklore of Britain, of the waterways, as we said, as the woodland, of the plants, of the mysticism. They've also done books on witches as well. They've got compendiums of stories that you can have at your bedtime. Full disclosure, Batsford sent me this book a little while ago, and they've sent me books in the past. I would have bought them anyway because I've always loved these compendiums. I will always recommend W.B. Yeats's collection of Irish folktales and folklore. It is a collection that I read as a child, detailing so much of Irish folklore, all of the creatures, the changeling, the legends, all of those old tales. Yeats's collection is dated now, but it is an amazing compendium. Another book from my childhood, and again that I would recommend again and again, are Oscar Wilde's Fairytales. If you've never read them, they are truly beautiful and heartbreaking. They are moral tales that have a religious nod at the end of it. They don't feel overly preachy. The Happy Prince, that story, I watched an animated version when I was a child. I recently saw Stephen Fry on TV doing a reading of it. That story makes me sob every time. There's something so beautiful and heartbreaking about that tale of the statue of the prince and the swallow who tries to help him. Every time, if I need a good cry, I will read that and just on the floor in the fetal position sobbing. When it comes to revisiting and retelling our favourite fairy tales, one book has my heart in a chokehold. It is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. Angela Carter took many of the great classic tales and gave them a modern twist, a sensual twist, a dark twist when she wrote this collection in the 1970s. She takes stories like Red Riding Hood, she takes Bluebeard, she takes Puss in Boots, Beauty and the Beast, and she gives them her own twist. She makes them sensual, she makes them dark, she makes them twisted, she makes them morally wavers all the way through it. And in her incredible style and her wonderful way of storytelling, The Bloody Chamber was also the inspiration for another one of my favourite films, The Company of Wolves by Neil Jordan. I've mentioned that in my Gothic films video. Oh, The Company of Wolves, which takes her version of Red Riding Hood and very much twists it. Wonderful collection, The Bloody Chamber. Please read it if you haven't. This is 101. This is your history lesson. This is your grounding. This is the person who did it so well. And then everyone, I think, built from here to go, we can do this now? Fantastic. Angela Carter also did Angela Carter's book of fairy tales. She curated so many stories and she rewrote them and she adapted them. And it's a huge, juicy, beautiful book of fairy tales that you can dip into every now and then. And yes, it's got her signature bits of darkness to it. Her intelligence just shines through, her talent for storytelling. Wonderful book. This is your friendly reminder to please like and subscribe to this video so you can get more book recommendations from me in the future, and film recommendations, and spooky things recommendations, and crow footage. There's more crows coming up. They have actually been following me. It's getting a little bit weird. The first book I'll recommend is the one I read most recently. It is Bitterthorn by Kat Dunn. I read this in August. This was Kat Dunn's first book, and I had read her second book, Hungerstone, earlier this year, and Hungerstone's one of my favourite books of 2025. Bitterthorn is set in the town of Blumwald at the end of the 1800s, and this is a town that carries a terrible curse. It is stalked by a witch who lives in a castle out in the twisting, winding woods that no one can find, and the witch demands that every 50 years the town give her a companion. Generally these have been men in the past. The companion is never seen again. While she has her companion, the different seasons reign over the town and people enjoy spring and summer, but then when winter creeps back, the witch demands a new companion. The story is told from the perspective of Mina, the daughter of the Duke of Blumwald, who is trying to maintain his political strength and his important seat in the empire, and he's also trying to manage his household through his new wife. Oh, a wicked stepmother. Mina is bright and capable, but she's also terribly lonely. She is not exactly accepted by her stepmother, who is all about propriety and status, and her step-siblings feel much the same. So when the witch comes calling, looking for the companion, Mina, on a whim, offers herself up, so she can escape her home and go and find out what the witch is all about. The witch is alluring, she is beautiful, but she is secretive, and Mina must not only live with her in the castle, but also try and find out what it is the witch wants with her, the witch who seems to ignore her as soon as she arrives, and what really is cursing the land, is cursing the witch, what secrets are being held at the castle. The aesthetic of this book is absolutely spot on. You have this Germanic setting, late 1800s, so it's not exactly medieval. You've got hints of beauty, of opulence in the castle that Mina grows up in. This alluring figure of the witch, she is dark and brooding and mysterious. This sapphic love story, this sort of fascination develops between them. And the castle and the surrounding, it's everything you want in that sort of dark fairy tale setting. And it's a very good story at its heart, and it's a lovely story that draws inspiration from so many fairy tales that you'll spot it as you go through the book. Just little symbols and little nods to some of the fairy tales that you know and love are in there, and I so appreciated that. It's very romantic in parts, it's that slow burn feeling, and I don't really want to go further into that about what happens with it, but there is a mystery at the heart of this, and it is a really nice creative tale. I so enjoyed this book, and it is a perfect one if you want to get lost in the atmosphere of a great fairy tale with a lovely sapphic story at its heart. This next one, those who know it love it and wish people shouted about it more. It's House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. This is a YA, a young adult book. This is an original book. It is rooted in the real world with elements of fantasy, with folklore, with horror in there. It is strange and beautiful and so compelling that I walked away from this book going, I don't know what drug was I given that I feel like I've been swept under its spell. House of Hollow is the story of three sisters, the Hollow sisters, and this is set in the modern day, in the real world, as it were. We know that as children, something strange happened to the three sisters. They disappeared for a period, and they did not know where they went, what happened to them. It was a great mystery. The girls are now in their late teens and early 20s. They have a degree of fame and notoriety due to their beauty, due to their influence. But then one of the older sisters goes missing again, and it is down to the youngest, Iris, to try and unravel the mystery of what has happened to the girls when they were younger. What secrets were kept from them by their parents, by the people around them, and where is Grey? Why can they not find her? This is magical, it is fantastical, it is dark in the way that the cover of the book, if you see it here, this cover of the book sort of personifies the vibe of this book so well, because you have the beauty of the girls, these lovely flowers, and the blood trickling down under it. Beauty, nature, and a darkness, something sinister happening at the heart of it. It's weird and entertaining and a good read, but you sort of feel like you are wandering through this fairy tale land in a haze, in a mystery of something that is, again, rooted in the real world. A book for anyone who is interested in folk horror but maybe wants to dip their toe into it. Some of the lore in this book becomes quite obvious the more that you go through it, and it's a very nice take on it. I don't want to explicitly say what it is because I just want you to go into it and experience it. And tell me what you think. Tell me what you think of this book, because again, I'm still sort of thrown by it. Next up, we have an original tale that is based on a real-life story and legend and changeling lore. This is dark, this one, and you need to be warned, but it is bizarrely compelling. It is The Cottingley Cuckoo. This is a book that people either absolutely loved or did not like at all. They were not sure of the direction of this book because it is half a tale of sort of folklore and fairy tale and a little bit of strange mystery in there. And then it's also a psychological horror in another respect. And all of that mashed together, well, it probably intrigue you. The Cottingley Cuckoo is the story of Ruth, who is working at a care home for elderly residents, and she meets one resident who wants to give her a glimpse into her past life, into the letters that she wrote to Arthur Conan Doyle at the time of the Cottingley Fairies incident. Now, that is a true story. The Cottingley Fairies was a famous hoax that took place of these fairy photographs. I will put a picture of it on screen. This was a hoax that Arthur Conan Doyle was taken in by. He was fascinated by the occult and by fairies, and he believed that this was true, and then there were all sorts of debates later on where he said, no, I never believed it was true. Loads of people were taken in thinking this these photographs proved the existence of fairies at the bottom of the garden. I know it sounds ludicrous, but back then it was a big thing. But in this tale, in these letters that Charlotte shares with Ruth, these are letters with someone imploring Arthur Conan Doyle that they actually do have proof of fairies. And so you have this dual split timeline of Charlotte and the origins of the letters and what is going around that circumstance. This person trying to prove that fairies exist and what is happening to them and the people around them in this quite sinister, uncanny, are fairies real and are fairies nice? At the same time, you have Ruth's story, and this is a dark story of her wrestling with her own internal demons, where she is just not happy in her life, and she discovers that she is pregnant. And as she is being immersed in this world of fairy lore, she also becomes interested in the idea of changelings, and this presents an enormous psychological battle for her and will lead her down very dark paths. Changeling lore, if you're not familiar with it, it is the legend, the saying that the fairies can come from fairyland and swap a human baby with one of their own, so it can be raised by humans, or they want to take the human child back to fairyland and raise it as their own for their own nefarious deeds. There have been real life cases and stories across the years of people being convinced that their baby, their child, even grown adults, are not who they say they are not the same person because the fairies have come and swapped them. I so enjoyed this book's take on fairy lore in a very interesting setting, and also taking the real life story of the fairy hoax back in, from many, many years ago, taking that and using it to challenge someone's modern perceptions of fairies and the insidious fear of fairies that existed for centuries. That fairies, yes, you may see pictures that people have of fairies being cute and lovely, but fairies, you don't mess with the fairies. You do not mess with the fairies. In a lot of folklore, the fairies are not there to be your friend. They are not Tinkerbell. They are not going to float around and grant you wishes and just sit there and smile. No, 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 no. The fairies want something from you, and you mess with them at your peril. And I love the way that this is channeled in the book, the idea that people naively think that fairies are fine, and they are not. And then the other side of that, the changeling lore, where people feel absolutely that fairies are evil, and they are responsible for everything bad that is happening around them, and that if you see someone and they're not the same, then the fairies have gotten to them. And what can that do? What paths will you go down when you have someone utterly convinced that someone is not who they say they are, and no one believes them? Are they right? Cottingley Cuckoo, tread carefully, but a very, very interesting twist on fairy lore. Coming out of the darkness a little bit into a great modern fairy tale writer, and a writer that I was not sure about when I started on the journey, but I have really come to like, and I've gone back to their books many times. It's A.G. Slatter, and the book I'm going to recommend is The Path of Thorns. This is one of the books of the Sourdough universe. You do not need to read those books in order. Most of them, I think there's one that maybe would benefit if you read the books beforehand, so you get to see all of the characters. But this is a magical world of fantasy, of witches, of shapeshifters, of werewolves, of vampires, of all of these things. Delicious, delicious world. And through her books, A.G. Slatter conjures up these very interesting, multi-layered stories of family, of deceit, of murder, of mystery, and of magic at their heart. Path of Thorns channels so many different fairy tale and folklore tropes into it that you will get definite value out of this book if you're after something that is fairy tale inspired. You have the story of Asher Todd, who has come to the Moorwood Grange estate to be a governess. So Gothic tropes immediately. She has turned up, but she has a secret. She is not as she appears. She may not even be who she says she is to the family there, but the family are hiding secrets in all of those Gothic tropes there, in that classic story of her being the governess and watching and observing, and she may have some beef with the family that she wants to fix, but she's also got powers on her side. She's also got spells that she can cast. She's also got ways about her. And there's also a werewolf just outside stalking her, potentially. Maybe it's a sexy werewolf. You've got creatures, you've got ghosts, you've got Gothic tropes in there, potions and spells being cast. It's got such a great fairy tale quality to it, this book, as well as putting it in a great Gothic setting. So it is just this sort of huge, delicious, piled up sandwich. That's the only way I can can describe it as many, many layers to it. And sometimes, you know, when you're eating a sandwich like that, it can be difficult to get through. There were moments while I was reading this story, enjoying the sandwich. I'm going to put my hands down. But while I was getting through it, I was kind of, okay, right, there's a lot going on here. Am I getting the threads of it? But you walk away from the book going, wow, that was good value. I feel like I got that sandwich was such good value. I need to tell other people about that sandwich. Literally at this second have I just made the connection in my head that I've been saying sandwiches and this is part of the sourdough universe. It had good bread. Path of Thorns, do check out A.G. Slatter's work. I have more of her books on my shelf that I want to get to. A writer that I wasn't sure about at first, but I keep coming back to her, and that is the sign of a good writer and a good snack and a good sandwich. This next one probably is a favourite and one that I have not stopped recommending to anyone who loves their fairy tales. This is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. This is a twist on Sleeping Beauty's story. To remind you of one of the crucial parts of Sleeping Beauty's story is that when she fell into her sleep for 100 years, she was in a tall tower, and part of the witch's curse that put her in there was that this huge thicket of briars grew all around the tower and spread out so no one could get to the tower, no one could ever reach her, so that no handsome prince could come along and go mwah, mwah, mwah. Really, the idea of kissing someone who's unconscious should have kept the prince away, but you know, it's a fairy tale and they don't understand consent. But Thornhedge tells a story of Toadling. Toadling, a frog-like creature who is tasked with guarding the thorn hedge. We meet Toadling as she is doing her duty of hanging out at this thorn hedge and just making sure no one comes by and keeping people, and she's tired and she's fed up and trying to do her job. But then one day a knight approaches the brambles, having heard the legend that there is a great prize beyond them, and ends up encountering Toadling. And we hear Toadling's story. We also hear the knight's story, but we hear Toadling's story. And this is a story of the fairies, of a story of a child captured, of Toadling's tasks, of all the things that Toadling was asked to do and had to endure through her life, and the real story of Sleeping Beauty, of why she is up in that tower. This book is only just over 100 pages, but it packs so much in to such a short story. Toadling's story, her origin, her relationship with the fairies, her appearance, and Aurora's story, the Sleeping Beauty story of her, of why she is in the tower. Absolute stroke of genius, I felt, when I got into the story and learned of Sleeping Beauty's story in there as well, and of what this twist is. Such a clever take on this story, so beautifully told out, and such a nice, refreshing version of it that is not purely focused on the love story. I listened to an audio version of Thornhedge and it was wonderful. Please get it on your list. We have had some fairies, we have had witches, we've had new tales and retellings of old ones. How do you guys feel about The Little Mermaid? You're going to feel very differently about her after you read The Salt Grows Heavy. Ooh, she pretty. Cassandra Clare's novella that is a continuation of sorts of The Little Mermaid's story. And in this, The Little Mermaid is no delicate little princess. This isn't strictly a story of The Little Mermaid. A lot of people have sort of nodded to if The Little Mermaid had an afterword, if we got to see what happened at the end of her story, whether you want to take the Disney version or whether you want to take the original Hans Christian Andersen version of what happened to The Little Mermaid, which is very dark and very twisted and not happy at all. But this is the story of a mermaid who is fleeing on land, having grown her legs, the downfall of her empire, of the prince who was supposed to save her, but of course wasn't saving her at all. And it is a mysterious, strange, wandering, poetic, and incredibly dark tale of the mermaid making her journey, accompanied by a plague doctor, a non-binary plague doctor, who goes with the mermaid as they try to refine their voice and making their way through this world and encountering some pretty horrific obstacles. This is a story of body horror, but is a body horror story of great beauty. The world that they are moving through is nightmarish. The things and the punishments that are inflicted on people are brutal and gory in parts, yet it is a love story at heart as well. It is something that's deeply affectionate and deeply moving, as well as being quite grotesque in places. It can feel interesting to work your way through their use of language, but there is such a lovely lyricism, and that really harks back to strange, bizarre fairy tales of old. If you want an interesting twist on mermaid lore, get it on your list. That is the small selection of fairy tale stories that I have read that I wanted to recommend to you today, and there's always room for more in the future. But now I want to share some of the books that are on my TBR, that are on my radar, or have been recommended to me, that fall into this magical fairy tale with darkness category. A book that is very high up my TBR, and I'm very excited to get to it, is Knock Knock Open Wide. Now, this is a story that apparently mixes Celtic folklore with horror. It's the story of a young woman initially who encounters a corpse on the road one night, decides to move the corpse, and some terrible things happen. Horrific things happen. 20 years later, we have the story of a young woman who is at college in Dublin, and she meets and falls for the daughter of the woman from the beginning of the story. The daughter, Aisling, is trying to keep her family history and secrets hidden from her new lover, but also has theories of her own about a haunted TV show from her childhood. That is a short synopsis of the book. I have not delved into it yet, but many people say it has a wonderful folklore twist to it. It's got lots of Celtic myth and legend that it draws on. I can't wait to get to it. Another book recommended that plays with mermaid lore is Into the Drowning Deep. This is the story of an expedition that 7 years ago went to the Mariana Trench and did not come back because of some creatures down there. Now a new expedition is going down to try and find out what happens, and things will no doubt go down. If this sounds like your cup of tea, put it on your list, or if you've read it, let me know. Some of you may have been screaming this book at the screen since I started talking about fairy tales, but Uprooted, one that has been recommended to me, but for some reason I have never gotten round to reading. A fairy tale town that is cursed by a wizard, and a young woman is going to try and challenge that. Uprooted gets rave reviews from so many people. I haven't read it yet, and I feel like it's going to creep into my TBR soon. If you have read it, would you recommend it? This is bridging the gap a little bit with fairy tales, but Saltbones is a new book that has just been released, which is an update of the Persephone and Demeter story, but it is set in the Mexicali borderlands, and it is taking a lot of indigenous stories, a lot of folklore from this area, with this retelling of this classic Greek legend. It's got family drama, mystery, elements of horror in there, with this central core story of a mother and daughter relationship. Described as spellbinding. Look it up if it sounds like your cup of tea, or let me know if you've read it. Another big fairy tale book that I have not read a bit of it, liked it, but for some reason didn't carry on, The Bear and the Nightingale. This book was huge on its release. Russian setting, icy landscape, cottage of a family, a father who brings a stepmother into a house that has previously observed various rituals and folklore and pays homage to spirits, but the new stepmother doesn't want any of that, and now terrible things befall the land. I haven't read this. I haven't finished this book. I think I read the first chapter, and I've no idea why I didn't carry on. It was a big deal at the time. Is The Bear and Nightingale worth it? Catherine Arden, very respected author. There's another of her middle grade books that is on my spooky season TBR. Should I be reading The Bear and the Nightingale? Maybe for winter. Finally, this is also very random, but I found this on my shelves and went, wow, I didn't know I had this. This is the book of The Princess Bride, the beloved film. I absolutely adore the film. And I've never read it. I've never actually sat down and read it. And I know it's got little bits of metafiction at the start with a framing device about someone talking about this book that does not exist as if it's a real book. Has anyone actually read The Princess Bride, the original novel? Let me know if you have. Or if you just want to yap about the film, let's do that. That is a small collection of books inspired by fairy tales, with fairy tale or folklore at their heart, and with a little bit of a dark twist, because it's me. I'm always looking for more recommendations of great fairy tale books, so please drop them in the comments below. You may have cozy, cutesy ones that you want to recommend, or maybe you want to go down a really dark and twisted path. Remember, I do have an entire series of videos dedicated to folk horror, so let's stick with fairy tale in these comments now. But the two do kind of cross over. Maybe we'll do some sort of mashup. Remember to subscribe to my channel, because I have more videos coming up in my spooky season series detailing the ultimate list of books I think you should enjoy in the autumn. Also spooky watches, spooky activities, and spooky shenanigans. And I've also got a trip to Edinburgh coming up, and there's going to be some very creepy stuff going on up there. Stay spooky, bye-bye. Fictional tales of fairies and folklore drawn from real life. It's a terrible opening. And this is my spooky corner of YouTube, where I talk about the spooky books that I've watched, the spooky film, me, and It's just, it's spicy dragons. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. I just was hoping for something more. Much like Rapunzel.